Steve, good morning, man. How are you?
I'm good. Can I ask, is the traffic better in Baton Rouge because people are staying at home a little bit more?
Yes.
I'm genuinely curious.
Yeah, it's been incredible.
It was for about 6, 7 weeks, but now they're over
I
it.
don't know, bro. I came in pretty
Um,
late this morning. It was still pretty chill. Still pretty
Yeah,
chill.
that's
So it's
that
one of the few positives, I would say, Steve.
that is the only negative thing I can say about that. I love Baton Rouge, but I will when I'm down there, get stuck on corporate and college and just miss the light like 6 times. That's my lasting memory of the wonderful city of Baton Rouge.
Yeah, I guess gotta avoid that intersection. So before we get into Baton Rouge though and LSU,
hmm
let's talk about Ole Miss. How are you feeling? Give me the local temperature on the lane train. What's the feeling surrounding the Black Bears right now?
The wonderful thing is that I live in Nashville, and I try and stay. Since I did all the Leo Lewis reporting a couple years ago, I've
Yeah.
tried to stay. I've begged for assignments outside of Mississippi, unconnected. Just get me as far away from that as possible. Um, from the coaches that I've spoken with, they think that the rivalry aspect will be tamped down a little bit, just because those two guys don't care, and it's the furthest thing from Lane's mind. So I think both rosters are inherently flawed. They've got a lot of work to do. I think it's going to be more headlines than it is going to be quality football for probably about 2 years. But yeah, they're excited. Lane's going to be a much bigger name. They need it in terms of ticket sales. Don't this is sort of we're not connected to any of the COVID stuff, but they were having a really, really tough time selling tickets the
Wow.
last couple of years, and that was a major factor for firing Matt Luke.
And so when you look at it, then both of him and Mike Leach coming in, like you said, there is some excitement there now. Who do you think has the best chance here early on of kind of punching up, of maybe stealing the game? Because like I said, there's a lot of work if they're going to be legitimate, like SEC West contenders, if they ever work into that tier. But who in year 1 and 2 maybe steals one off somebody big?
I think it probably is Ole Miss initially, just because that roster's in a little bit better shape and a little bit more, I would say, sort of oriented into what Lane can do. And then Lane is a very versatile play caller. I mean, that's sort of his biggest attribute, is that he's gonna. I mean, I watched him in a Sugar Bowl run an entire offense through Amari Cooper one time. That's I hate using the word genius in any regard because it's overdone, but he's an innovative offensive mind.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think Leach is as well. I think it's just a matter of fitting the roster to what Leach wants to do. And he typically starts slow. I mean, he started slow at Wazoo. He started slow at Texas Tech. I think hiring Zach Arnett was huge, because I think he's a guy who understands how to call a quality defense against that type of offense. So it'll be really interesting to see how that works. Now, they have KJ Costello, pretty good quarterback, but he ran a system at Stanford that's fundamentally different than what they're going to do at State. So it could be ugly initially, but I don't know. I'm kind of positive about Leach in the SEC, whereas everybody else kind of laughs at it. What if you gave him this caliber talent for a couple of years? Let's see how far he could take it.
Stephen Godfrey, senior reporter for SB Nation, joining us here off the bench, ESPN New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Alexandria. He's on Twitter at 38 Godfrey. We mentioned that Athlon's coming out with their college football preview on June 1st. You'll have some of the write-ups in there on some of the coaching talks from the offseason, but you also have a feature on LSU. What are your thoughts on the reigning national champs? Have they replaced so many on both sides of the ball and try to defend this championship?
Yeah. So the task that was put in front of me by Athlon was to take LSU and then apply it to some sort of model that Clemson has created, whatever you want to consider Clemson to be. And that's not because they beat Clemson in the national championship. It's because if you're looking at staying power and the style of coaching, I think Clemson is the closest comparison that you can have for what Ed Orgeron has done at LSU. And what I mean by that specifically is a CEO coach that's very public facing, very, very, very hands-on in recruiting, kind of orients himself around the brand, right? Changes a culture that was completely different than the one previous to him. And then in the piece, I kind of write, this is in contrast to the dominant Southeastern Conference model for the past 15 years, which is the Saban style. And what does LSU need to do to replicate or just achieve the consistency that Clemson has had? And did LSU set forth in maybe creating some sort of trend where people are going to gravitate more towards the CEO model of coaching staffs versus the old sort of Saban mini dictator fiefdom that we've seen through so many programs, especially in the SEC the last 15 years.
What did you learn in seeing that? Because I think Arkansas is trying to follow the model when they look at LSU. Are you seeing that that's popular in college football, or is it tough to replace because Orgeron's he's such a good fit?
Well, I mean, he's a phenomenal fit. He's ridiculous. You guys know that.
Right.
I mean, I championed the move early on. Look, man, I want some credit. I want a lot of credit, actually.
Well, this is the credit source of Baton Rouge, so you're in the right spot.
Yes, but I knew this was going to fit because obviously I had, let's call it an affiliation with Ed, because my first year out of college, I was covering my alma mater when when that whole thing went disastrously. But over time, Ed learned from his mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Ed's a fascinating study because he's someone in college coaching does not really support a second act.
No.
If you think about it, I mean, usually you flare out and that is it. But this guy was so consistent. I think the way that he worked back up through the ranks, especially now when you look at I'm sure you guys talk about this all the time, but like just imagine him staying at USC and how different that would be right now.
They got to be kicking themselves.
I mean,
no, they never would have allowed him the latitude though, right? That LSU has. They would have always kind of turned their nose up, I feel.
It's funny you say that, T-Bob, because I think that ultimately doomed him, at least in a different perspective at Ole Miss, which was he was creating the breakthroughs, especially with talent acquisition, right? And he kind of cycled through. He didn't really know how to run a coaching staff, but at the time, but you see similarities in USC and Ole Miss and sort of that country club mentality, whereas and look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That first year and a half, 2 years, I was there when guys ran the wrong way and they lost to Florida and everyone was convinced that he didn't know what he was doing.
Yeah.
It was not an instant fit in Baton Rouge. Y'all know that. But yeah, he's culturally, I mean, he's the best fit I've ever seen in sports for obvious reasons. But I think the CEO style specifically, I don't know if that's going to replicate to Arkansas, because Arkansas has been a program with a crisis of identity going on 20 years.
Yeah.
What is Arkansas in the Southeastern Conference? We still don't really know.
Yeah. I'm
actually working on something right now about Petrino. And when you look at, they had a quick flash with him, but otherwise it's been kind of just we don't really know where we are in the pecking order since they joined the conference. And also Arkansas doesn't have the resources that LSU does. I think you look at Clemson, they built themselves into a superpower because of the fundraising, the autonomy that they gave football. Yeah. These are things that already existed in Louisiana for LSU specifically. So I think in order to replicate it, you need to have the right ingredients.
Yeah. We are in the forest here. You are looking at it from an outside perspective. It feels like LSU football is at the center of a lot of interest and intrigue from everybody around the country, whether it be recruits, media, coaches. Do you think that Orgeron has built a power that can stay consistent in the sport?
I think he's done everything that you can to transition out of big, powerful regional name into national brand. And I think when you look at the history of college football in the modern era, you can keep 5 or 6 names in the front of your head as an 18, 19-year-old anywhere in the country. Mm-hmm. If you're a 5-star player and you're in Baltimore, you're in Portland, Oregon, there are 5 or 6 names that you feel are ubiquitous. And I think that's what LSU's becoming. And you look at the way that they've recruited. Louisiana might have taken and I'm not a recruiting guy, so I'm going to be very careful, but it might have taken like a step or two back in terms of like the quality of signing class to signing class. I'm talking about the quality in state.
Yeah.
But what you saw there was Ed going out to places like Maryland, to Los Angeles, and the Southern California thing is fascinating to me. He has ties out there, obviously, with USC, but USC itself has done such a bad job. The quarterback who went to Alabama, his name I just forgot.
Yeah.
They're not protecting Southern California the way they would as one of those national brands. And so the difference to me with LSU in the last 2 years is that it has that instant, they call it like a Q rating in advertising. There's a recognition of Louisiana State University in the Northeast, in the Pacific Northwest, in the far reaches of Texas, and places where it wasn't just always about, we're going to keep them in state, we're going to do this thing, we're going to kind of hit I-10, we're going to stay at home. They are, I think, national now in a way that they've never been.
Yeah, and that's just what happens from playing on that stage. There's a fascinating New York Times article from a couple years back looking at the rise in Alabama out-of-state tuition and how that correlated with them just constantly playing for these natties. We're talking to Stephen Godfrey of SB Nation here on Off the Bench, 104.5, 100.3, 94.7 ESPN. Stephen, I want to pick your brain on some more SEC stuff. I've been asking everybody who covers the SEC this question. Out of the East, is it Florida or Georgia?
It's probably Georgia. I don't know if they have enough concrete solutions to some of their problems. I'm being diplomatic here.
Yeah.
I think Florida's taken. It's weird. Florida they took a step back in recruiting the last couple of years relative to who they are and what they've been and what we've known them to be. Kirby recruits better. Kirby probably develops better. The only difference is they haven't really coalesced, and that offense was abysmal last year. So I think this year specifically, the referendum and the entire conference. Because look, if LSU takes a step back, well, of course they were going to.
Yes.
Right. It's a ridiculous deficit from 19 to 20 in terms of coaches, talent, everything else. If Alabama stays about the same, if they're one game better or worse, that's about consistent, kind of what we expect. If Georgia fails to seize the moment now, you've got to start looking at this thing as not what it was hyped up to be, because the margin was slimmer for Kirby than any other coach that's taken a premier job in the last 5 years, because they had a consistent 9, 10, 11 game winning head coach in Mark Richt, and they said that's not good enough. They brought in a guy to win titles.
Yeah.
And so the margin's so much tighter there. And offensively, I mean, I don't know, man, they look like Alabama pre-Kiffin play calling.
Like LSU.
And you just can't do that. Yeah. I mean,
they do.
I don't know if we're going like Jordan Jefferson option pitch smash left
maybe not that
but
bad.
I mean, you were there. I don't tell you, but pretty bad. At least by the standards, the amount of athleticism they have relative to the lack of scoring and drives and sustaining drives and just creativity in general. If this sounds familiar, it's because this is sort of like the refrain of the end of the last mile there in Baton Rouge.
Stephen Godfrey, great insight on the SEC. In fact, Athlon's coming out with their college football preview on June 1st. He's got a great write-up on LSU and assignments within. Before we get you out of here, scale of 1 to 10, Atlanta Falcons new unis.
The uniform, I love them.
Oh, no.
I love them.
Really?
Nice try.
Where were you going? Where was the depression coming from? Just an outlook for the season?
Because you said Atlanta Falcons.
Just Falcons.
Okay. I like the whites.
That's just knee jerk.
Is it the retro look of the new look the best look though?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're never going to beat the 66. I mean, y'all's fan base is the same thing. Like we kind of perfected our uniforms in like the late 60s, and everything we do after that is just kind of window dressing.
That's right.
I agree.
Yeah, the black. I love our old logo so much better than the current one. But I mean, I understand it. It's recruiting purposes, guys. You got to get in the hearts and minds of 18-year-olds.
Exactly. The Oregon
Stephen Godfrey is the senior reporter for SB Nation. Let's do this again. That was great. Thank you, man.
Thanks, guys.
All right,
Take it easy,
checking
Stephen.
in.